The Ancient Light by Nico Smit. Chapter 1. The River. The low rumbling sound of the river steadily increased in volume as they approached. Roughly 3 hours had passed since the men had left the summit, moving at a steady pace over and between the hills to the north of Green Oak Town. By now, Juan could feel his feet hurting inside the new shoes he was given. He was also getting quite thirsty, and welcomed the thought of some water from the river. "We might be able to see the river once we reach the top of the next hill," he told himself, the idea of the river still a rather forbidding thought in his mind. The Nayad was a strong, wide river, and its water was a foamy, light brown in this area. The coloration of the water was due to the dusty, loose ground the river sucked up from its banks. Juan had no frame of reference to compare other rivers to the Nayad, as he had never traveled to see any others. The only time he came this far north was when he and some friends dared each other, a couple of years ago. He remembered how beautiful he thought the river was when he saw it, but back then, he would not risk entering it. People in town told stories of dark creatures living in the waters, preying on victims who dared to attempt a crossing. He knew not if those stories had any truth in them, but the facts did stand in favor of this being a reality. Most people who left to cross the river never returned. They were reaching the top of the hill now. The incline flattened out and formed a wide plateau at the summit for approximately 300 feet or so. They kept navigating their way through the rocks and bushes, mostly jumping from rock to avoid the thorny brush. As they reached the end of the plateau, Juan could see the decline of the landscape on the other side of the river over the ridge, wondering if they would have to climb the hills on the other side as well. "Where on earth are we going?" he thought. One of the men motioned for him to stay back. Without question, he went and sat on a rock to lift his feet off the ground a bit. The two men went ahead and quite effortlessly climbed up a rather large boulder near the ridge, no doubt to scout out the surrounding area. Juan wanted to take off his shoes so that he could rub his feet a bit, but was afraid that they might be cross with him, seeing as they made him put them on in the first place. Resigned to his fate, he simply tried to press through the leather with his thumb, massaging the sides of his aching feet. He looked up to observe the surrounding area, noticing that the sun was hanging quite low to the horizon. Maybe another hour or so of decent daylight left, he speculated. Juan wondered if they were going to cross the river, and how. He was getting quite anxious to reach the part of the day that he could ask them some questions. Burning with curiosity, he took a few stabs at speculation, but no idea really made enough sense to have any plausibility. The two men hopped off the boulder, both landing cat-like in crouches, then straightening again. The big man waved at him, and Juan presumed that this meant he was to join them again. So he got up and followed them as they started making their way over the ridge and down the hill. The shadows cast by bushes and rocks grew taller as they made their descent. Juan noticed that the whole river was already covered in shadow. He peered down at the foreboding waters that he had only seen once before. So long ago he thought to himself that it was quite an impressive sight now that he took it in again. So much water. Why wasn't Green Oak Town built next to the river? Somehow it seemed to make more sense to Juan to have all that water at your disposal. He studied the flow of the water. The river flattened itself out in the middle of the stream, but towards the sides, it seemed restless. Rolling waves bellowed over submerged rocks, forming white foam. Here and there, where the rocks trapped the moving waters, vortexes formed, deepening the mystique of the devouring serpent. The river ate away at the parts of the bank not consisting of solid rock. One specific thing that Juan found interesting was the plant life that grew near the riverbank. The reeds and grass that decorated the earth around the muddy banks and shallow water were unlike the rest of the vegetation that covered most of the area around Green Oak Town, breaking the monotony of the landscape somewhat. Juan humored himself with the notion that, if not for the dangers, moving to live next to the river might have been an attractive prospect, especially now that he was not sure if there even was a home for him to move back to in town. Juan flinched again at the memory of his uncle's body lying on the floor. The surreal nature of day's experience had numbed him to some extent, but slowly, the emotional pains overtook him, as the reality of it all became more tangible. They made their way down the foot of the hill and reached the valley floor. Juan deeply inhaled the fresher, cooler air. The smell of wet soil mixed with fresh grass lightened his mood somewhat, and even kindled some excitement for the pleasant unknown. Juan silently followed the other two as they walked a few hundred feet next to the river. The men changed direction, and they now headed into the reeds closer to the water. Juan guessed that barely anyone ever walked around here. The reeds were thick. He had to struggle to make his way through them. He followed close behind the two men. It was getting dark, and he had no wish to get separated from them in the twilight. The ground under their feet felt softer, and Juan felt pieces of mud clinging to his shoes as they neared the river. A new sensation of fear now slowly entered Juan's thoughts as they approached the water. He found himself thinking it might be better to stay thirsty rather than battle the aquatic creatures over a drink of water. Juan lifted his eyes as one of the two men spoke up, pointing into the reeds and saying, "Here." The two men went about the task of removing dried reeds and grass from a heap on the ground. Juan quickly realized that they were in fact uncovering something that he completely failed to notice beforehand. Pieces of wood and rope now showed as they removed all the reeds, throwing it away. Juan had never seen a raft or boat, nor had anyone he knew ever used anything like that. All forms of transport, communication, and knowledge of river navigation was destroyed after the Great War, and traveling was so dangerous that very few ever attempted it. Juan's curiosity overcame him now, and he found it near impossible to keep honoring their previous request for silence. He cleared his throat as softly as he could and asked, "What is that?" "That," said the presumed leader of the two men as he threw a bunch of reeds away, "is a raft, my friend, and if you like, you can even call it a boat." The man's tone of voice sounding rather friendly. "And you are going to climb on top of it now," he added. "We are going for a ride down this river, on this raft." Juan startled. "A ride down the river?" he asked, alarmed. "Yes, it floats on the water, you see," explained the leader, gesturing with his hands. "So once we push it into the water and get on, we can float on it down this river. The strong stream will carry us. We can use these two poles to steer the raft somewhat, but mostly the stream will determine where we are going." Juan eyed the construction with suspicion, taking this whole concept in and trying to make sense of it. "Well, on you go," said the man sternly, interrupting Juan's thoughts. "Go sit in the middle." At least, the man had a smile on his face, thought Juan. The friendliness in his expression and voice enticed Juan to trust him. So he hopped on and went to sit in the middle of the raft. "Hold on now," said the man as the two of them heaved the raft towards the river. It slid quite easily down the muddy slope, heading straight for the water. Juan could feel the raft lift as the water pushed it up from below. He was floating. The men kept pushing until they were about waist deep into the water, then they climbed on as well. The stream took the raft and dragged it downriver. Juan stared at the bank of the river in the fading light. Wow, he thought, amazed. They were really going fast, about the speed of a man lightly running. The two men stuck two poles in the water, using it to maneuver the raft towards the center of the stream. Once they reached the main current, they lifted the poles and placed it on the raft. The craft was quite big. There might even have been space for 2 or 3 more people on it, estimated Juan. The bigger man grunted and the boat bobbed as he sat down near the edge of the raft, taking out his backpack and unpacking something from it. The other man came and sat cross-legged right in front of Juan, showing a bright smile in what was left of the daylight. "Well, we made it here," he said. "Thanks for sticking to it and holding back on talking. Now I assume you would like to start asking some questions." An evil smile crept over the face of a cloaked and hooded man. The room he stood in was almost utterly dark, but for the eerie burning candles surrounding the glass globe on the table. The room smelled of spice and wax smoke. The man stood with his long, thin fingers greedily clasping the glass ball. He gave a chuckle and drummed his long nails on the smooth surface. "Finally," he said in a near whisper, "after all these years of waiting, one of my spies found a target."